Americans for Fair Taxation presents the weekly Chairman's Report, written by Steve Hayes, president of Americans for Fair Taxation, and recorded by Bob Paxton, a volunteer with the Florida Fair Tax Educational Association. And now, this week's Chairman's Report.
Hello, I'm Bob Paxton with the AFFT Chairman's Report for Friday, August 18th, 2023. The wrong allocation of resources. In an article in the August 10th, 2023 Wall Street Journal, former Senator Phil Gramm and Jody Arrington discuss how the Biden administration wrongfully allocated money to the IRS and how they've made practically no effort to recover money stolen during the pandemic. Here are some of the points made in that article. Criminals stole at least $1 trillion from taxpayers during the pandemic. And to date, the Biden administration has offered only lip service and modest funding to try to reclaim these funds and punish the thieves. Meanwhile, President Biden is hiring an army of new IRS agents to shake down Americans that he claims are tax evaders, and his commitment to this is substantial, $80 billion to hire 87,000 new IRS agents. According to Congressional Budget Office estimates, all that extra manpower and money will net the federal government only about $100 billion in increased revenue collection. Now, the House Ways and Means Committee estimates that fraudulent payments made under the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program alone could be high as $400 billion, only $5 billion of which has been recovered. Almost all the crooks who stole taxpayer money are getting away with it. Now note that in 2022 alone, the IRS itself made an estimated $25.4 billion in improper payments in only 3 programs: the Earned Income Tax Credit, Additional Child Tax Credits, and the American Opportunity Tax Credits. The GAO estimates that the level of improper payments by the IRS in these programs alone runs as high as 28% of all payments made. Yet, none of the $80 billion in new IRS funding is specifically earmarked to deal with fraud in the welfare programs funded with tax credits and administered by the IRS. Now, despite the administration's claim, the new IRS enforcement revenues flowing in from its $80 billion surge in funding will come primarily from middle and upper middle income Americans. The Joint Committee on Taxation estimates that 78 to 90% of the money extracted from underreported income would come from those making less than $200,000 a year, with only 4 to 9% coming from those making more than $500,000 a year. A Senate Finance Committee analysis showed the new IRS enforcement spending would predominantly hit taxpayers who have low or very low adjusted gross incomes. Nearly half of the audits would hit Americans making $75,000 a year or less. Now, if the government were serious about being fair to taxpayers and deterring future fraud, they would aggressively hunt down the swindlers, recoup fraudulent payments, hold criminals accountable, and implement safeguards such as an identity and eligibility verification system. Now, Congress has a choice. They can harass honest taxpayers, or they can track down the crooks who stole their money. In conclusion, the most interesting point made in this article is how it shows what the D.C. elites and their minions in Congress consider important. They allocate $80 billion to the IRS, which is expected to yield a net of $100 billion in additional collections over 10 years. Now, since the people evading taxes don't identify themselves as evaders, there will need to be at least 5 to 10 harassing audits of American taxpayers who try to lawfully report their income to possibly find one cheater. However, they make no attempt to pursue real criminals who have stolen at least $1 trillion of the money designated for pandemic relief for honest American businesses. That tells you a lot about their priorities. Now, all of us agree that people should report their income and calculate their taxes honestly. Now, we know that the evasion rate for the income payroll tax system is at least $1 trillion a year. Now, if this $1 trillion was collected, that's $1 trillion we wouldn't have to borrow to support current spending levels. However, doesn't it make more sense to recover the $1 trillion in stolen pandemic funds and not just harass American taxpayers to maybe collect $100 billion? Now, what possible reason could there be for this irrational decision-making by the D.C. elites and their minions? Well, it's because they want to protect the income payroll tax system. They want to protect what has become a lucrative source of money and power for them. The income payroll tax system allows politicians to rake in multiplied millions of dollars from lobbyists seeking to buy favorable tax treatment for their clients. The ability to hand out tax breaks to some and tax penalties to others gives them ability to control people's behavior and also to reward their friends and punish their opponents. It's this insatiable desire for money and power that fuels the D.C. elite's adamant opposition to the fair tax. They see the real threat that the fair tax is to their income source and their ability to control us. Now, the members of Congress that care about us don't have to look far for an alternative to the present income payroll tax system that abolishes the need for the IRS. It's H.R. 25, the fair tax. Now, the fair tax transfers power from the government and bureaucrats to the people. We, not the bureaucrats in D.C., will decide how much tax we pay. Now, Congress in D.C. know that there's a better alternative to the present tax system, and that, of course, is the fair tax. So, instead of spending time and money doing endless hours of paperwork that don't create anything of value for yourself, your family, or the nation, why not eliminate the unnecessary waste? Isn't it time to end this ludicrous tax collection system and the IRS along with it? When the fair tax is enacted, there will be no need to fear being audited by the IRS or raided by armed IRS agents because there will be no more IRS. Now, there's going to be a vote on the fair tax in the House of Representatives. Speaker McCarthy and the other elites didn't want it, but it was forced on them. So now we have the opportunity to force all the members of the House to show where they stand. They can vote for the present income payroll tax system, or they can vote for the fair tax. They can support the corrupt income tax in the IRS, or they can vote to eliminate it. It can't be any simpler than that. They can hide the true cost of their government, or they can pass the fair tax and show everyone the true cost of government on every retail receipt. And finally, they can support the largest transfer of power from the government to the people, the fair tax, or they can vote against it. Now, if members think the fair tax needs to be changed, then they can propose the change. Don't let them get away with rejecting the entire bill because it has a flaw that can be easily addressed. Please stand with us and demand that your representatives support a much fairer, much simpler, and much more efficient way to fund the government, the fair tax. The fair tax doesn't pick winners and losers. Because it taxes spending, not earnings, the fair tax lets everyone save for their retirement tax-free. The fair tax will allow us to take back control. The income payroll tax system is broken. It's no longer working. We can't repair it, but we can replace it with the fair tax. Join us and take back control of our country and our lives, not with bullets, but with the elimination of one of the biggest threats to our liberty and economic prosperity, the income payroll tax. We should all remember Edmund Burke's warning that applies to our efforts to take back control. Nobody made a greater mistake than he who did nothing because he could only do a little. We should also remember this quote from George Orwell's 1984, which, if we do nothing, may foretell your and your children's future. If you want a picture of the future, imagine a boot stamping on a human face forever. So what can each of us do? We can write letters and make calls to our elected representatives and attend Zoom town hall meetings demanding that if they really want to allow Americans to take back control, the first step is to eliminate the income payroll tax system and enact the fair tax. Take back control. Help us pass the fair tax. Help us bring about real tax reform and stop future IRS abuses. By contributing or actually investing $10.40 a month, you help provide a financial base to Americans for fair taxation. Now, if you can make larger contributions/investments, these will be used not for salaries because we're all volunteers, but for the needed updates to our economic studies, which will be vital for all future years. Please go to fairtax.org and invest in AFFT. It's an investment in your and your family's future.
This has been the Weekly Chairman's Report, written by Steve Hayes, President of Americans for Fair Taxation. Check back every week for news and information about the fair tax, and learn why the fair tax should replace our antiquated federal income tax system. If you'd like to receive a copy of the Chairman's Report in your inbox every week, sign up at fairtax.org.